Promising to solve 60 years of conflict in the Middle East, Donald Trump welcomes the Palestinian Authority president, but doesn't detail how he plans to revive the peace process with Israel. How will politics in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel affect the US efforts? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome. I'm Darren Jordan. A promise to succeed where his predecessors have failed. The US president says he can help Israel and Palestine reach peace. Donald Trump hosted Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas at the White House on Wednesday and promised to revive stalled negotiations with Israel. He didn't detail how that would happen. The last talks between Israel and the Palestinians collapsed 3 years ago. So, is there reason to be hopeful this time?
We want to create peace between Israel and the Palestinians. We will get it done. We will be working so hard to get it done. It's been a long time, but we will be working diligently. And I think there's a very, very good chance, and I think you feel the same way.
Mr. President, our strategic option, our strategic choice, is to bring about peace based on the vision of the two states, a Palestinian state with its capital of East Jerusalem that lives in peace and stability with the state of Israel based on the borders of 1967.
So this is the US position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When Donald Trump was campaigning to be president, he promised to relocate the US embassy from Tel Aviv and recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. He appointed a former hardline lawyer as US ambassador to Israel. David Friedman opposes a two-state solution and supports Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. Well, Trump has chosen his son-in-law as a mediator. Jared Kushner will try to broker a peace agreement in the Middle East. Well, Donald Trump isn't committed to a two-state solution. He seemed to be flexible on the idea when he met Israel's Prime Minister a few months ago.
So I'm looking at two-state and one state, and I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like. I can live with either one.
Well, one of the reasons it hasn't been easy to find a solution to the conflict is because various Palestinian factions relate differently to Israel. There's the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas. It had been negotiating with Israel before the peace process ground to a halt 3 years ago. Hamas has governed the Gaza Strip for a decade. Until a new, more softer charter was adopted on Monday, Hamas called for the destruction of Israel. Well, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas have a long-standing rivalry. Hamas, which is considered a terrorist group by the US and others, repeatedly criticizes the PA's cooperation with Israel, especially on security matters. Well, let's bring in our guests. In Washington, D.C., we have Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. She's the director of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. In Amman, we have Ibrahim Freiheit. He's a professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and specializes in conflict resolution and the Middle East peace process. And in London, we have Yossi Mekelberg. He's a professor in international relations at Regent's University. Welcome all to the program. Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, let me start with you first, if I may. I mean, Donald Trump says he's confident that a deal can be done between Israel and the Palestinians. He says he will get it done. Do you think he's being overly optimistic, or does he lack a real understanding of the issues here?
Well, I think yesterday's meeting was all about atmospherics and less about details and specifics. Clearly, this was about setting a positive tone, projecting a sense of hope and possibility. The devil, of course, will always be in the details. I think it hasn't eluded them that this has been over a quarter century of trying without effect. We didn't see much specificity yesterday, as mentioned, as to what will come next. But there was a hint of the kind of approach they're taking, and no direct sense that they were rushing to talk straight away. So I think what comes next remains to be seen. Let's
get the view from Amman and talk to Ibrahim Freiheit. I mean, is Donald Trump really serious about peace in the Middle East? I mean, he hasn't committed any resources to it, and some observers say his priorities in the Middle East are ISIL and Iran.
Well, I think his statement, I read it as it fits a pattern of confusion and lack of understanding of how to deal with the region. as he, in the past 100 days in office, he has made so many contradictory statements, actually. On one hand, he asked Netanyahu to hold on settlements, but then he sends an ambassador to Israel, the American ambassador, that he's a pro-settlement activities. So that's in the meeting with Abbas, he asks Abbas to continue the security coordination, and then says that he wants to continue to be a neutral party. He will not impose anything on this. Since he came to office, there is a huge level of contradiction. He has made his priorities in the Middle East very clear. ISIS is #1, Iran is #2, and after that, actually, he moves to Asia, to North Korea and China. There is no mentioning of the peace process. There is no mentioning of Israel-Palestine. And he has made it clear that he has not made any resources, actually, available in order to move this forward.
Yossi, Mekelberg there in London. I mean, Ibrahim Freiheit seems to be saying, look, we haven't heard any of the details, but let me ask you, do the details really matter at this point? Or do you think he's just trying to set a different tone to Barack Obama?
And I think this is important, that he set the right tone. Yes, we know that this is administration that is full of contradiction. It's a bit erratic. It's also very hectic. It doesn't have a coherent agenda, but it has a lot on this agenda with a lot of issues on the table. But the fact that he actually dedicates time to that, you know, in these current circumstances, let him have his own chance. Many presidents that were well-intentioned, some less, some more, failed in the last 24 years and even before the Oslo process. He says he wants a deal. He invites Abbas to visit him. He saw Netanyahu before. He's about to visit the region sometimes later this month. And I agree, you know, the Israelis and Palestinians know the details. There are no big secrets. As long as there is no two-state solution, self-determinations for the Palestinians, Jerusalem is the capital of both, dealing with the refugee issues and the settlements, there is no agreement. So as long as the sides that negotiated and give or take know the details, what they need is a push. And maybe, just maybe, Trump is the one to give them the push.
All right, let's talk about the Palestinians then. Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. I mean, they announced a unity government in Moscow, but haven't we seen this narrative before? I mean, is this all about Mahmoud Abbas strengthening his hand and strengthening his position?
We've certainly seen this before. There have been multiple attempts that have amounted to little in practical terms in terms of reunification. The gaps are incredibly wide between the two parties. And you've seen over the last few days some of this internal political jockeying playing out. You've seen less than subtle attempts by Hamas to remind the Palestinian street, I think, and the world of its relevance. You know, the day before, I believe, Abbas arrived in Washington, there was this issuance of a new Hamas manifesto, a document with an ostensibly showing some flexibility on previously held positions. But again, it's unclear what this will lead to. If this were an easy problem to fix, there's certainly been no shortage of attempts, and it hasn't happened until now. And obviously, if Trump is to move forward as he projected yesterday with proving the cynics wrong and pursuing a successful peace process, this won't be possible without addressing the issue of Gaza, certainly with its growing humanitarian crisis and the urgency of that, and the divided Palestinian polity. But steps forward on this remain a little unclear.
Yeah, let's bring in Ibrahim Freiheit there. That infighting between Hamas and Fatah is quite a significant point. Even Trump warned that there can be no lasting peace unless the Palestinians speak with one unified voice. We had the announcement of that unity government in Moscow. What's the thinking behind that? Is it going to work? Is it going to make a difference?
Well, I think we have seen a serious move, actually, from Hamas in the past couple of days, actually, of accepting a state on the 1967 borders, which was different from the previously held positions in the past. And this came actually just 2 days before Abbas' visit to Washington, which gives a strong signal here that the Palestinian political position actually has never been closer than it is the way it is now. Because one key factor for the Palestinian divisions, the polarization, has been actually the political agenda, the political project between Fatah and Hamas. And now, actually, with Hamas accepting the 1967 borders for a future Palestinian state, I think the positions have moved very closely. But that's not the reason, actually, why Donald Trump or the U.S. administration that is not able or is not willing, actually, to do anything about the peace process. There is what we read here, actually, there is a commitment to the process, not a commitment to peace. And there's a huge difference with the statements and with Trump saying that I'm not going to impose anything, I'm only going to be a mediator, and is not showing any pressure on the Israeli government. That's not going it's not going to yield any results, or it's not going to make peace, because the major problem here is the occupation. It's not about, you know, who says what and what. So there is a commitment to the process of give more money and continue the peace, the talks with futile negotiation, pointless negotiations, and we're seeing the process that started 20 years ago just continuing business as usual.
All right.
I don't see that there is going to be anything different.
Okay, let me bring in Yossi Mekelberg here again. Yossi, how significant then is this move by Hamas to soften its charter? I mean, the doctrine now says they no longer call for the destruction of Israel, but still support armed struggle. But that's not going to change Israel's view, is it? They still see Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Well, I think first and foremost is to recognize there is a change on the side of the Hamas. It might not be a significant enough or a big enough change, but the fact that they recognize that there is another entity, and the Palestinian state, when it's established or formed, should be within the borders of 67, I think no one should ignore. On the other hand, they at the same time talk about, you know, that the main enemy is the Zionist entity. And I think this kind of language should at one point or another change. There is the state of Israel. It has to be recognized the same way that a future Palestinian state should be recognized. On the other hand, even if it's not enough at this stage, the Israeli government bound to accept that the Hamas is changing. The Hamas is not a monolithic organization. There are debates there are arguments either to move in this direction or continue only the armed struggle. We need to accept, as long as there is an occupation, there are those who will support an armed struggle to end the occupation, but all leads exactly to the same point, that all sides need to negotiate a peaceful solution. If I may just add one point, the disunity among the Palestinians don't help them around the negotiation table.
Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, what's your take then on this possibly more softer tone from Hamas? They're saying they now recognize the 67 borders. Are we possibly seeing Hamas implicitly recognizing Israel without saying so, but still trying to remain a key political player?
I think the key point there is Hamas trying to remain a key political player. It is struggling right now. It's, you know, the screws have tightened all around, both from Egypt, from the PA itself. You've seen Abbas in the past couple of weeks start tightening the screws there on Gaza, both refusing to pay for the electricity and essentially saying to the Hamas government, you know, if you need to let us back in and give us control both of the you know, the economics and the security, if you want to, you know, if you want us still engaged financially, and if you want to avert this humanitarian crisis. I think they are trying to remain relevant. They're trying to maneuver in a tight political spot. This new charter, so it does suggest, as both Yossi and Ibrahim have mentioned, some flexibility on this issue of recognizing a Palestinian state within 67 borders, though this is not entirely new. There has been some discourse you've heard come out from Hamas over the last few years that has leaned towards this direction anyway. But they're obviously trying to strike a careful balance. As Yossi noted, there was There's no rush to give up on the right to armed resistance. There was a softening of language from the Charter, specifically saying this was about the Zionist entity and not Jews, but again, no explicit recognition of Israel. So I think, again, this is a little bit of testing the waters, and at this point, all we can read into it is an effort to keep itself in the limelight and relevant, and not subsumed by Abbas as the only Palestinian leader in consideration.
Ibrahim Freiheit, let's get your view on it here. I mean, how politically pragmatic is this move by Hamas to change the language in its charter? Is the real reason that perhaps doing this facilitates Hamas being part of the wider Palestinian front politically?
Well, I think it's a very important move, and especially actually for certain constituencies, especially for Europe. Actually, Europe wants to see something done like this, from Hamas, that is linking more to the political process and to the negotiation. I'm not sure, though, that this is going to change anything on the U.S. front, because the U.S. front historically has adopted the positions of the Israeli government. The position of the Israeli government has been made clear by Netanyahu and is not going to make anything different on that level. I think that there is, and here let me disagree slightly with my colleagues actually. The problem is not about Hamas recognizing Israel or anything. Actually, it's about Israel recognizing that there is another state. I mean, we started this negotiation since 1993, and now we are in 2017, and the position is still that the Palestinians recognize the geography of Israel, and Israel does not recognize anything. So how come that you are expecting or demanding or asking Hamas to recognize Israel, and after since 93, Israel has not recognized anyone on the other side? So there is a serious problem here that I have with the model, with the negotiation, and the current political move between Abbas, Donald Trump is just reinforcing a failing model that started in 1993 and is continuing business as usual of just endless negotiations while Israel creating no facts of settlements on the ground, and there is the problem.
Okay, I want to just get one final point from Yossi Mekelberg on this softer Hamas charter, if I may, before we move on. The new charter, Yossi, says Hamas will end its association with the Muslim Brotherhood. Is that a move that Israel will see positively, even if it's designed to improve Hamas's ties with Saudi Arabia and Egypt, who see the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group?
I think, again, it shows level of pragmatism, as Lucy said earlier. On the Hamas side, they know that they need to work in one way or another with Egypt. Otherwise, the closure on Gaza is even tighter. And as a result, distance themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood at this point is important to them. I think it's important to see at this point that there is level of pragmatism, there is level of flexibility. It's definitely not what Israel would like to see, but also to ignore it will be a mistake in my mind. The Hamas can't immediately recognize Israel because it means giving all the cards that it has in its hand. On the other one, I think all sides, including, as Ibrahim said, Europe, the United States, Israel, should leave the space and the room for the Hamas to change enough to become a completely legitimate partner in negotiation if it wishes to be part of it.
All right, let's move away now from the Hamas charter if we can. Lucy, let me come back to you there in Washington and talk about the role perhaps of other countries like Russia. I mean, Moscow is a key player in the Syria crisis. The Hamas-Fatah unity government announcement deal was done in Moscow. Could we see the Russians perhaps take a much bigger role at point in any future talks?
We certainly could. We've seen over the last few years a little bit of jockeying for a number of countries and attempts to step in and play a more significant role. As we've seen the history of this process, though, ultimately it has tended to be the U.S. that plays the primary role. once you get to negotiations, certainly. I think it remains to be seen, how Russia steps in here, and if this is even a priority for it, given all the other geopolitical concerns. Of course, there are other countries important here too. Questions about what the EU will do, and of course the Arab world, which will also need to be a part of this process if it is to take off in any meaningful way. The Europeans in the past have tended to wait and take the lead of the US, and I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. We saw the brief foray with the French initiative last year, but that didn't really build any momentum. But I think at this point there is a sense of other countries, including Russia, sitting back and waiting to see how serious President Trump is about pushing forward a meaningful process, and then I think you'll start seeing the other players fall into more discernible roles.
Ibrahim, I saw you nodding your head there. I mean, would the Palestinians prefer Moscow to mediate in any sort of renewed talks? And what about the Arab world? What's their role here?
Well, the Palestinians actually would like to see any intervener, any mediator getting into the middle and trying to make sense of these negotiations after the U.S. has monopolized this negotiation since 1993, and it continued to lead from one failure to another. The problem is that Israel. Israel is not accepting any third party who can become even-handed and is willing to work with the parties. Israel wants to maintain a paradigm of negotiations where they are with the Palestinians under one ceiling and no one else is negotiating there, which is exactly the model of the wolf negotiating with the sheep. There's no way that you can achieve anything unless that full surrender from the Palestinians, from the weaker party that's negotiating with an incredibly powerful party. So that's Israel has made it so clear in the past of not accepting any third party, not Russia, not any other party. So the model has to change. I here blame Abbas that he has to change also his approach. You can't, when you announce that you're going to negotiate and negotiate and negotiate, you're just giving the Israeli government what they want. Is that just continuing to negotiate for what? You need to change the balance of power. And once Abbas changes, some cards and play some other cards of being to address the power imbalance, that's when we will start to see changes and probably an opportunity for Moscow or any other more neutral, even-handed third party.
Okay, Yossi, Mekelberg in London. Is there a greater role, perhaps, for other countries to step in here? I mean, some people believe that Gulf Sunni Arab states like Saudi Arabia are already aligned with Israel in their views, their hatred, perhaps, against Iran. Could that unity help, perhaps, in facilitating any kind of deal in the future?
Yeah, I'd go back to my earlier point that the details are known to both sides. If they really want to sign peace agreement based on two-state solution, I think, give or take, the parameters are known. What they don't have is the leadership that is capable, or in the case, I think, of the Israeli government right now, willing to do so. Now, this creates the room and the space for international community to be more active. Russia is back both politically and military in the Middle East, which means it has even more interest in being involved. And to add to this is, yes, reviving the Arab initiative, the Saudi initiative, is important because this gives to Israel an extra incentive. Not only you sign peace with the Palestinians, you also, by that, create peaceful relations with the rest of the region.
Okay, Yossi, I have to leave it there. Let me get a final thought quickly from all of you. Lucy, can we see peace in the next 4 years of the Trump administration? Very briefly.
In the next 4 years, I think it's a tall order to think of seeing a final comprehensive peace the way that was expressed as the hope yesterday. Could we see some progress towards that? I think that's possible. Again, how that will play out now remains to be seen.
Ibrahim, a final quick thought from you, just a couple of seconds. Yes or no? Are we going to see peace?
No, we're not going to see peace as long as the formula of negotiation exists the way it is now. This has to change, and then we can start talking about peace.
OK, sadly, we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. And thanks to all our guests, Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen in Washington, D.C., Ibrahim Freiheit in Amman, and Yossi Mekelberg there in London. Thank you all. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter, our handle, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Darren Jordan, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.